Hi, welcome to my channel Cloud with Girish. In my previous video, I explained how to set up Lambda destination for handling failed event, demonstrating how to store these events in an S3 bucket. AWS Lambda destinations also support other options such as SQS, SNS, Event Bridge, or another Lambda function. In this video, I will demonstrate an alternative approach to managing failed event using a dead letter queue with Amazon SQS. With a DLQ, failed events are captured in an SQS queue, providing a mechanism for troubleshooting and recovery. Both approaches using a DLQ or a destination requires asynchronous invocation of the Lambda function. For this demonstration, I will use AWS CLI to invoke the function asynchronously. You will notice similarity with the previous video as the key difference lies in configuring a DLQ instead of a destination to store failed events. If you missed the earlier video on setting up destination for failed events, you can watch it using the link provided in the description below. Let's look at our architecture flow. The flow is very similar to what I have described in my previous video about destination. The key difference here is that DLQ can only be configured either using SQS or SNS, while destination have more options. So here we have either Event Bridge, S3, or other services which can invoke the Lambda function asynchronously, and then CloudWatch is being used to log the events, and then SQS in this current example is set up as a DLQ, the dead letter queue, which will store the failed events. Prerequisite is familiarity with the AWS Management Console, a basic understanding of Lambda function, a basic understanding of simple queue service, a basic understanding of event-driven architecture, and a basic knowledge of Python programming. Let's get started. We're going to review a very simple Lambda function, hello from Lambda. I'll add a DLQ, the dead letter queue, which is a SQS queue, and then I'll add the code to raise an exception. I'm forcing the failure for the Lambda function so that event can be logged in the DLQ. We'll review the CloudWatch log, we'll review the DLQ, and then I will invoke the Lambda function using AWS CLI. We will see that if message is being logged in the DLQ or not. And then at the end, we'll do the cleanup, which is basically deleting the Lambda function and all the associated resources. So let's look at our Lambda function. The primary purpose of this video is to demonstrate how DLQ work for AWS Lambda function with a specific focus on configuring a dead letter queue for failed event. To keep it simple, the Lambda function will implement a basic hello world example that returns hello from Lambda message. This baseline function will serve as the foundation for demonstrating the DLQ feature. For this walkthrough, I will use the AWS Management Console to create the function and then add the DLQ configuration. So let's navigate to the AWS Management Console for Lambda function and then click Create Function. Create a function named hello world GB as shown below. So if you see, I have the name as hello world GB. I'm selecting the Python 3.13 as a runtime. And then I have a role that I have already created. You can select a role that you already have, or you can create a new role here, right? You have that option. Here is the example code for in the screenshot. It's a very simple code generated by Lambda function by default, and this is the view from updated Lambda code editor. It's a very VS Code like screen. If you are unfamiliar with this console, you can check out my other video that explains how to build a Lambda function using the new editor and SAM template. The link to that video is in the description. So here is our code. It's simply getting the event context, which we are not using, but it's simply returning that, hey, hello from Lambda. Next, I need to add a dead letter queue, which is a SQS queue. So I'm going to create this SQS queue, and this queue will be used as DLQ. So to create the queue, let's navigate to the SQS service console and create a new queue named Hello World DLQ. So this is my queue name. Make sure the Lambda function has the necessary permission for this SQS queue, because without this permission, you will encounter an error when the function try to write event to the DLQ. So this is my DLQ here. And then next thing, since now I have the DLQ created, I will go back to my Lambda console, and from Lambda console, I will configure this del letter Q for the hello world GB Lambda function. So this DLQ is actually storing the failed event. So like to configure it, let's from our Lambda editor, click on configuration, go to asynchronous invocation, and then click on edit. Once you click on edit, you can then add the configuration. So here, like you say, hey, my dead letter Q is SQS, and it will show you the queue that you have in that region. So in my case, I already have created this hello world GBDLQ. So I'm selecting it, and then it's basically saving it. So it's configured for this Lambda function as a DLQ. Now, DLQ is configured for failure scenario, so it will log event when Lambda function encounters a failure. So to test this, I'm going to update the code to intentionally raise an exception. So that will force the failure of the function, and then basically means that the message should go, the fail message should go in the DLQ. So here I'm adding this line here, raise exception. So if you see, there is no if condition. So every time this function get invoked, this exception will be raised, right? And then when I invoke it, this is the kind of error I expect, where it say, hey, something went wrong. So this is like the failure scenario that I'm configuring for. Now, if I go to my CloudWatch log, I will see a new log group has been created, AWS Lambda hello world GB. So this is created by the Lambda function through the first invocation. So this will store the error as well. Now let's look at our dead letter queue. So if I go back to my SQS dashboard and navigate to the DLQ that was configured for this Lambda function and check that, hey, since I invoked the Lambda function and it did fail, do I have the fail message here? And if you see, it does not have that message. The reason that DLQ, even though it's configured correctly, does not have the message, the fail message, because the Lambda function was not invoked asynchronously. So DLQ function will work when Lambda function is invoked asynchronously. So now what I need to do is to invoke it asynchronously so that the fail message get logged. So there are a variety of way, right? Different services, depending on the use case, that the Lambda function can be invoked asynchronously. You can set up it through the event bridge or an S3 bucket or some other event, and make it a asynchronous call. But in this demonstration, I'm going to use the AWS CLI command to invoke this Lambda function as asynchronously. So here is my command AWS Lambda invoke, and this is the function name. I'm providing the ARN for that function, and I'm saying, hey, invocation type is event, and then I'm providing some sample payload, even though we're not using it, the region, and so on. So if I see the status code of 202, so by nature of asynchronous call for the Lambda, when you get 202, that's the indication of that call was successful. It doesn't indicate that what you wanted inside that call actually went as per the plan. Is basically the handoff that yes, the async call was successful, and now the next set of processing will take place, right? So here I'm getting the status code of 202 because of the asynchronous call. And now if I go back to my dead letter queue again, then I will see that there is a failure message logged here. So this is because how my Lambda function is configured, right? It will always throw failure. So every time I invoke this Lambda function, I will see a message here. So like this is what is showing. So if I open up this message through the console, it gonna show me the attribute of the message. So this is like, it's really based on how I have it in my function, right? So if you remember, I was raising that exception saying something went wrong, and that's basically noted here. Now, of course, I can have like a customized message depending on the scenario that I have in the code, but that's what I will see. So it's very helpful in debugging and uh, planning the corrective measure if I see that there is an error that's causing more and more failed event. So really a good way for the error handling and the corrective action, and making sure that I'm simply not losing that event. Once we're done with it, we need to do the cleanup. So just make sure that we have deleted the function, the queue, and CloudWatch log group, any other resource that really we created for this function to work. So in this workshop, I demonstrated how to configure a dead letter queue using SQS for a Lambda function. Additionally, I showcased how to invoke the Lambda function asynchronously using AWS CLI command. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and informative. I'm constantly working on new content covering various AWS topics, so please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Cloud with Girish channel. Your support helps me continue creating valuable AWS tutorials and workshops. Stay tuned for more exciting content. Thank you.